Subjectivity is the idea that each person has a unique individual experience and viewpoint. Subjectivity is a concept that plays a significant role in how we interpret reality. Subjectivity is not just about existing as a person, it is about the ongoing process of becoming, shaped by the world around us. Who we are changes over time because we are influenced by various experiences, beliefs, and cultural factors. To illustrate this, French philosopher Simone de Beauvoir famously wrote, "One is not born, but rather becomes a woman." This quote highlights that identity, like being a woman, is not only a matter of biology, it is also shaped by social and cultural expectations. Society plays a huge role in defining what it means to be a woman. Therefore, our identity is not simply given at birth, it develops through an ongoing process influenced by social norms, expectations, and personal experiences. When we talk about a subjectivity, it is helpful to understand it in contrast to objectivity. Objectivity is often valued as a quality of science and research where personal biases and emotions are ideally set aside to gain a clear factual view of things. However, philosophers and scientists now recognize that subjectivity, the presence of individual perspectives and experiences, also plays a role in shaping how we understand even scientific knowledge. The so-called observer effect illustrates this by showing that simply observing an experiment can influence its outcome. This insight has led to a more nuanced view of knowledge, acknowledging that complete objectivity is challenging, if not impossible, because our perspectives inevitably influence what we see and interpret. The terms objectivity and subjectivity are tied to the relationship between the perceiver or subject, usually a person, and what they perceive, known as the object. The object is generally considered something separate from the subject, something that would exist even if no one were observing it. But philosophy often questions whether reality truly exists out there independently or if it is shaped by how we perceive it. This leads to complex debates, especially in fields of post-structuralism, which suggests that what we consider reality is to some extent constructed through language and culture. Derrida argues that the role of the subject, the person observing, thinking, or perceiving, is one of the most important concerns of modern society. This subject, however, is not simply interchangeable with terms like human or self. For example, human generally implies something universal and unchanging, like human nature, which suggests qualities shared by all humans. But subject does not carry this idea of universality. It is shaped by cultural and social factors, which means that being a subject is not the same for everyone. Similarly, self often implies an inner world of thoughts and feelings unique to each person, a personal inner space. However, subject refers to how we are shaped by the outside world, particularly by cultural and social factors. So while self and subject are related, they are not exactly the same. Self refers to the inner personal experience, while subject emphasizes how our sense of self is influenced by the culture around us. Foucault's idea on subjectivity challenged the idea that there can be universal, shared experience or essence of self across all people. He argues that subjectivity, our sense of who we are, is not innate or uniform, but instead shaped by the various discourses or systems of thought that define different aspects of life, like religion, psychology, or politics. These discourses provide frameworks through which we view and interpret ourselves and others, influencing how we understand concepts like self or man. For instance, a religious discourse might define man differently than a psychological discourse would, and thus Our identities are partially products of the frameworks or discourses we subscribe to. Subjectivity, then, is both shaped by and subjected to these discourses. For example, if someone views themselves primarily through a religious lens, their understanding of self may reflect religious teachings and expectations. Conversely, an atheist might construct their identity through discourses associated with atheism. In the individual's subjectivities are shaped by these frameworks, but they are also restricted by them as they are expected to adhere to the rules of that particular discourse. This influence is not merely passive. Foucault also highlights that we actively engage with these discourses, sometimes combining or selectively adopting them to construct our identities. In this way, he suggests that adopting multiple perspectives allows for a more flexible and potentially liberating sense of self, as it avoids being confined by any one discourse. Foucault emphasizes that the concept of self or interiority, the inner self, is not some separate, untouched essence within us. He argues that this idea of a purely personal, unique inner world is a myth. Our subjectivity is produced by discourses rooted in specific historical and cultural contexts. For instance, religious discourse has evolved over time with reform movements introducing new perspectives. So, when we consider who we are, it is important to recognize that we are shaped by the historical moment and the prevailing discourses of our time rather than existing as timeless, independent entities. Barker describes how subjectivity is essentially an effect of discourse. Every time we speak, we assume a subject position that already exists within a particular discourse. So when we communicate, we are not inventing our ideas in a vacuum. Instead, we are drawing from pre-existing language, terms, and concepts embedded within discourses. This means that our statements are never purely original. They are always shaped by these pre-existing frameworks. This concept of subjectivity is not fixed. People can move between different discourses, adopting multiple perspectives as they see fit. Postmodern thinkers see this ability to shift between discourses as liberating because it allows individuals to resist being fully subjected to the influence of a single discourse. Foucault's view, as interpreted by Barker, suggests that our identity or self is continuously being created as we interact with these social processes and frameworks, a dynamic process where we are constantly becoming rather than being a finished product. Fanon adds to this understanding on racial oppression. He describes his experience as a black man who, despite his own inner world and identity, is often reduced to an object by others through labels like nigger or negro. This experience highlights the tension between one's own subjectivity and how others see them, especially in oppressive situations. The gaze of the other imposes an identity on him that conflicts with his sense of self, showing how power dynamics can further complicate our subjectivity. Judith Butler builds on these ideas in her work on gender. She references Simone de Beauvoir's idea that one is not born but rather becomes a woman. Butler argues that woman is not a fixed identity but a term in process, subject to change as cultural meanings shift over time. This reflects Foucault's idea that identity is a cultural construction. For Butler, just as subjectivity is shaped by discourse, so is gender. As societal understandings of gender evolve, the meaning of woman will continue to change, never settling into a static definition. This understanding of identity as process-driven aligns with Foucault's concept that subjectivity is historical, fluid, and discursively formed.